Let's talk to Isabel Oakeshott. Isabel, very good morning to you.
Morning. It's a massive political day, isn't it? Because we've got the immigration numbers coming out, which I think will be really, it's an important moment. I suspect that they will show a fall and that, the government will try to, focus on all of that, but actually that they'll still be very, very substantial, almost certainly over 500,000, which is huge. And then there's a reform press conference later this morning, and I think that's going to make headlines. And what's really annoying me after our news headlines were read out is how on earth it's possible to spend £6 million renaming some train lines.
I know. We get given these figures, don't we? And we're supposed to just kind of swallow them. And I'm so glad you picked up on that, because I'm the same with you. Whenever anything gets done in the public sector, we're always told, oh, it costs $7 billion. And you go, well, why? What on earth would cost $7 billion when you did that? Why would it cost $6 million to repaint a few signs and to sort of, somehow... I mean, I can imagine that you're going to have to reissue a whole load of maps and all the rest of it. But this is an old story, isn't it?
I mean, well, if it's so old, it's perhaps that I've forgotten it, because it's only just sort of on my radar now. And not only do I find the new names ridiculously woke and unnecessary, I mean, why do we need a line called the Lioness line, for goodness sake? And then there's another...
No, the only reason I remember it is I remember the name's been coming out, and like you, thinking how ridiculous. I mean, is the suffragette line something you're supposed to throw yourself under? Is that something that you're meant to do? I just don't know. It seems the virtue signalling nonsense.
And then another line that's named after a hospital that apparently played a prominent role in the 1980s AIDS crisis. I mean, what again? And if someone said to me, can you please organise the renaming of these lines and all the changing of the maps and stuff, and I'm going to give you a budget of $1 million, I'd think to myself, yeah, I can probably make a profit on that. So
yeah, definitely.
What's that all about?
I know, absolute madness. Let's talk a bit about immigration, though, because you say the figures will likely come down, and much of that, I think, is going to be due to the foreign students who are now no longer coming here in such numbers because they've been told you can't bring your entire family with you.
Well, I mean, I'm not even going to necessarily believe that's the case. I think that the figures are a guess. I mean, we know that the government never knows quite who's in and who's out, and that there are a huge number of people who are slipping through the net entirely. And if the official number of students coming here has dropped off, I suspect the unofficial number who've overstayed their visas is a great deal larger than is being reported. And I think let's look at these figures when they come out, taking a step back from whether they've fallen by a few tens of thousands or more. I mean, the last set, just to remind people, showed 685,000 net migration over a 12-month period. What this set of figures does is also give a 12-month period, but with the 6 months that goes up to July 2024. And it's probably going to be somewhere around the 550,000 mark. I don't have insight, sort of any advanced knowledge of that, but let's say it is that. That is still over 500,000 extra people coming into our country. None of the infrastructure expanded to accommodate them. So if anyone thinks that that's somehow okay and heading in the right direction, my response to that is whoopee-doopie.
Well, this is it. I mean, it sounds like a smaller number, so we all go, oh, that's good, it's come down a bit. But in 10 years of that, you'd have another Scotland, basically.
Yeah, I mean, what people want to see, I think most people want to see, is about a tenth of that at the most. And I think there's probably rising support for net zero immigration, one in, one out. I probably be in favour of an actual net reduction, but net zero might ensure that...
I mean, I would be in favour of what they've done now in Poland, which is to basically say we are no longer accepting any claims for asylum. And if you're an asylum seeker, don't bother coming to Poland because we won't be giving you any.
Because there just isn't the room.
No.
There isn't the capacity to do it, and we've got to a point where the government is not only having to U-turn on its promise not to use hotels, but is now, via local authorities and charities, issuing pretty desperate pleas for members of the public to take in refugees. I mean, Kemi Badenoch, the new leader of the Tory party, said yesterday, Britain isn't a hotel. Well, I've got news for her. It is a hotel, and it happened on her government's watch.
Exactly. And what we now know is that this government is actually expanding upon that and seeking out even more hotels, even as we speak, to put more people in. And they're seeking a land in Kent to build more processing centres for people, because we also know that many people are coming to this country from countries like Afghanistan, Vietnam, Syria and Iraq, claiming to be gay and being given straight through the asylum system because they can't be sent away, given automatically. We're now at 100% acceptance for an awful lot of asylum seekers who come from those countries. So if you come from any of those countries, you're guaranteed pretty much to get asylum in Britain.
And however awful Britain is right now, and I think there's a huge amount wrong with our country, it's still an awful lot of a better prospect than Afghanistan and Iraq and a number of questionable places. And why the hell wouldn't you, if you're an enterprising sort with the ways and means to cross multiple borders of safe countries and get your ticket to the UK, why on earth wouldn't you? And, you know, if you're an ambitious type, I don't blame these people for giving it a go. They're going to have an awful lot better life here, all paid for by you and me.
Yeah, exactly right. Incredible. Let's talk a bit before we get to the Reform press conference, as I don't know what you can tell us about that. But the Chagos Islands thing seems to be an interesting one this morning. We just spoke to a representative of the Chagosian community. They said they want to remain British. They never asked to be given away to Mauritius. Mauritians are now saying, we never asked to get the Chagos Islands. We don't really want it. The Americans are saying, thanks to Nigel Farage, we don't think it's a very good idea. Who in government in this country decided to even think about doing this when clearly nobody in the situation that they are in wants it?
This is just another Labour government total and utter fiasco, isn't it?
Yeah.
Increasingly optimistic that this absolutely treacherous deal that was done behind the backs of the British people, presented to British voters as a fait accompli, they actually quite literally gave away part of the UK and our sovereign overseas territories, was just ceded without anyone being asked, without so much as a by your leave. It doesn't belong to Keir Starmer to do that. I don't think he had the right to do that, but he forged ahead, you know, in some secrecy, and now it's blowing up, and that is good. And the reason it's blowing up is for what you outlined there, that so many people can see that it's an entirely stupid idea. And even if it doesn't blow up before Trump comes in, what can happen is that the Americans just effectively refuse to sign up to it. And why do they have to sign up to it? Well, effectively, in giving away the Chagos Islands, what's been provisionally agreed by the Labour government is that we take a kind of long lease to cover Diego Garcia, the military base, and we would sign another lease in turn with the Americans. So we'd kind of sublet Diego Garcia to them. And they can just say, well, actually, we're not going to sign up to that stupid lease because the head lessee is Mauritius and nobody wants this. And, you know, these are a bunch of people who are allied to the Chinese.
Right.
You know, it's not a brilliant idea, is it, strategically?
Well, it's not, and this is the thing, you know, when it came out of the blue, whenever it was a few weeks ago, and we wondered if it was just a sort of diversionary tactic to stop everybody thinking about what Lord Ali was up to, it just seemed to be something that wasn't necessary, and you're kind of going, is really, you know, is this really a part of your first 100 days of government? You really want to do this? You know, like many of the things that they've done, they don't seem to think through what the consequences might be.
No, completely bizarre thing to do, you know, in your early days of your new government, to start chipping off bits of British overseas territory, literally making our country and our overseas interests smaller, shrinking us as a global presence. I'm getting hopelessly distracted here by pictures we're showing of Keir Starmer and John Healey, the Defence Secretary, wearing army fatigues.
I know.
This is such an unconvincing head spinner, isn't it? I mean, Keir Starmer just looks like a complete imposter there in his camo gear.
Yeah.
Can you imagine him actually doing anything that involved putting himself in any kind of danger. I can't.
It's funny, isn't it? Because so few politicians ever look good in that kind of gear. I mean, I think the last person that did look decent in it was Margaret Thatcher when she was sticking her head out of a tank. But, you know, every single... I mean, Rishi Sunak, remember that picture that was not so much Top Gun as tiny Top Gun when he and Volodymyr Zelensky were walking towards a helicopter carrying their sort of, you know, crash helmet type headgear. And they just... most politicians just look idiotic when they go anywhere near any military equipment.
I mean, I don't think it's quite as bad as the hard hat look. Have you ever seen a politician anything other than a complete wally with a hard hat? I think we pause for 1 second just to reflect that Ben Wallace probably did carry it off. A former Tory Defence Secretary was at least a former armed forces servant himself, so he could just about carry off that look. But basically no one else gets away with it, really, do they?
No, absolutely. So a Reform press conference is coming up at 11 o'clock. What can you tell us about that?
So I think they've hinted or sort of teased about the number of people that have now joined the party, are fully paid up members. So I think we might get some figures on that, and that might sound a bit dry in itself, but it's actually a very important indicator of a direction of travel. You know, if you've got fully paid up subscribers, you've got funds coming into a party, your party machine is growing, and you then have much more hope of having the kind of ground forces to fight elections. And I think there will also be a surprise. I'm really itching to come on, talk and comment on that as soon as it's announced. So it's not just about the status of the party membership, but also there will be a surprise revelation.
Oh, somebody's going to jump out of a cake or something. That'd be good. I presume also there'll be one or two things to be said about the new migration figures as well.
I don't know whether they will sort of stray on to that, but I think there's surely a lot to be said about the state of the Tory party on the back of Kemi Badenoch's speech yesterday, and Reform is clearly going places. You know, they had a dinner in London last night, organised not by the party machine, but by the London branch, and there were 500 people at that dinner who'd all paid good money to be there. Now, cast back 3 years ago when they had a London dinner, I think there were 15 people. So that shows quite a trajectory. Yeah, it absolutely does. And Professor John Curtis, I think, has been speaking this week as well about the very real possibility that the Tory party shouldn't be considered as the automatic, you know, opposition party at the next election, that it could actually be Reform. And he's not a man that speaks, you know, without thinking about the complicated nature of what he's saying. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the Reform Party leadership thinks that there's a really good chance that they could actually win the next election. Now, I don't want to overstate that because it's an enormous mountain to climb. They've got 5 MPs, you know, so that is an extraordinarily ambitious objective, but they are building rapidly, and it, in a sense, it doesn't just hinge on what happens to the Tory party, it's what happens to all those Labour voters, disillusioned as they are, that have been signing a petition saying, gosh, we really regret our choice and can we please have another say in this. So I don't think anyone's starry-eyed about this. You know, it's still an insurgent outside the party. It's got a hell of a long way to go. But politics gets much more interesting, whatever your political allegiances are, if there's true competition. And I think that's what Reform is partly doing, bringing that.
Absolutely right. Isabel, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Isabel Oakeshott there, Talks international editor.